Hello class, we are going to be in our science notebooks today. Go ahead and start by updating your table of contents. So we have cell organelle, organelle functions, page 31, cell organelle output, page 32. You may pause the video if you need more time to write. From there, I'm going to flip over to page 31. And let's go ahead and take a moment to set up our paper. So start off with, start off by giving it a title, organelle function. And then you can, from there, number it 1 through 10. I'm going to use the whole margin to save space and skip 2 lines between each vocabulary word to leave space. So 1 should be cell membrane, cell wall, nucleus, cytoplasm, endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi bodies, or sometimes called Golgi apparatus, vacuole, mitochondria, chloroplast, and nucleolus. So take some time to write those down, and then we're going to write down the vocabulary for each, the definition, So essentially, what's the function? So we have drawn them out on this previous page, so you know what they look like. Now it's a matter of, we know the cells are busy in our body. They're the reason we function. They're the reason we maintain homeostasis. What are they doing? And that's what we're going to talk about here. So once you have those written down, we'll get started. The cell membrane, which is, as you can see on both types of cells, it surrounds the cell. On the plant cell, it's the inner wall. The cell membrane actually separates the cell from the outside environment. It also is what's called selectively permeable, which, if you look at the word, it kind of makes sense with the definition. It's selective about what it allows to permeate or enter. So the cell membrane actually only lets some things in. So it protects us in a lot of ways. It decides what comes in and out, kind of like a bodyguard of sorts. The cell wall is only on plant cells, so I'm going to make a note of that. Plant cell only. And you might even want to underline that. It's a key component. The cell wall surrounds the plant cell here. It is an outer wall only on the plant cell that gives it its shape. And it provides additional support. So it provides support, structure, and it gives it its shape. Tends to make it more of a rigid shape, so with like edges and corners. Don't like that P. Okay. the nucleus controls the cell's activity. So it's kind of like the boss. It's the control center. And one of the reasons that it's able to do that is because it contains the DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. Remember, nucleic acid was one of our 4 organic compounds. So it contains the DNA, which are it's basically the instructions manual. It's the instructions or the code for how the cell should function and what it needs to do to process what we're putting in our body and everything that we're doing. Enzo had done his science fair on extracting DNA from a strawberry last year, and he had to use soap and alcohol and all these different things, but part of the reason for that is because he was breaking down the nuclear membrane around the nucleus, which is made of a type of lipid, which is a fat. And you know, soap gets rid of fat. That's why we use it on our hands. Soap gets rid of oils. So soap dissolved the outer part of that, allowing the DNA to actually come out of the nucleus and extract it. So there's other chemicals involved in other processes, but that's the main thing. Cytoplasm is really important. Cytoplasm is, so we've got our nucleus here, like I said, with the nuclear membrane around here. Cytoplasm is all this gel-like substance that everything sits in. So this is, if you imagine a 3D version of this, it's like a ball with a gel-like substance on the inside. And it has all of these floating components inside of it. So the cytoplasm is really important. It's actually, so it's a gel-like substance. Inside the cell. It's made of mostly water. You've probably heard before that our body's made of mostly water. Well, that's kind of what it's talking about. Gel-like substance inside the cell where chemical reactions take place. So those chemical reactions keep us alive. The endoplasmic reticulum. Endo is a prefix that literally means into. We'll learn more about that prefix later, but endoplasmic reticulum is near the nucleus. The nucleolus makes ribosomes, which we'll talk about later, but part of the endoplasmic reticulum is rough because it has some ribosomes on it, and some of it's smooth, but this is basically a kind of a tunnel, a gateway of sorts, that moves materials around the cell. So wherever they need to go in order to be processed, think of the cell as a machine. It's got all these working parts and everything's got its own job. Moves materials around the cell. And one of the really important things that it does is it processes proteins. So it actually, we talked about the importance of proteins, one of the organic compounds, the compounds for life. Proteins do so much. They do muscle development. They do help us with our immunity. They help us process tons of hormones and things in our body. So endoplasmic reticulum is really important for that process. Golgi bodies, or Golgi apparatus, sometimes called, actually it sort of sorts and packages the proteins that are created into these little vesicles, and it transports them either inside or outside of the cell or wherever it needs to go. It's kind of like like a shipping truck of sorts, or shipping factory. Sorts and packs proteins into vesicles and transports them where they need to go. The vacuole is only, well, excuse me, it's not only in plant cells, but it is definitely larger in plant cells. So far, everything's been the same except for cell wall and vacuole. I'll highlight that since it's a difference. So larger in plant cells. This stores food and other things, enzymes, and lots of other materials. Mostly water in plants. You'll see here in the plant cell, it's huge storage facility. And actually it can burst. It can get too big. It can also shrivel up and not be plump enough. Your plant will tell you if it's not getting enough water. And then within the animal cell, it's much smaller and there's more of them. There's only one in the plant cell. Okay, the mitochondria, or the mighty mitochondria. This is called the powerhouse of the cell sometimes, and this produces energy. It's a type of energy called, and you don't need to know this, but it's called ATP. It's adenine triphosphate. It's a very important type of energy that our cells use for, oh my gosh, everything. Growth, development, that should sound familiar from our characteristics of life unit. Growth, development, and movement. So pretty important, and that's within the cell and the cell itself, which ultimately, if our cells are growing, developing, functioning properly, not only are we maintaining homeostasis, staying alive, but we're also carrying out life's processes. We're able to do all the other things because of this. Mitochondria is interesting. There's a theory that the mitochondria is just a prokaryote that was eaten or something by a eukaryotic cell, and then the prokaryote somehow adapted to its environment and over time evolved to be the mitochondria, which is just crazy, but who knows. The chloroplast, this is actually only in plant cells only. Chloro is actually a prefix that means green. So I think you can make that connection on your own. But chloroplast is essentially going to capture light and convert it into chemical energy. You've probably heard of photosynthesis before. The reason that is able to happen is because of chloroplast. So captures light, and converts it into chemical energy. I don't actually love the way this ended up being organized, but that's okay. Too late to change it now. All right. I'm going to put in parentheses here too, photosynthesis. Process where it takes light and water, all that good stuff, and creates sugar in the form of glucose for energy. Okay. Nucleolus, different from nucleus. Nucleolus is inside the nucleus. Nucleolus in the nucleus. Nucleolus in the nucleus. The nucleolus is responsible for for assembling. So assembly of the ribosomes. And those are all over the cell and on the endoplasmic reticulum, and they do all kinds of things around the cell, and they're super helpful, especially regarding proteins. What's not on here is nuclear membrane. I'm not going to add it, but just for your information, the nuclear membrane is what's responsible for surrounding the nucleus and decides what goes in and out of the nucleus. So just like the cell membrane decides what goes in and out of the cell, the nuclear membrane decides what goes in and out of the cell membrane. So kind of going back to this activity, we have one larger vacuole, multiple small vacuoles. Plant cell has chloroplast and actually chlorophyll, which we didn't really talk about as much, but that's what's inside chloroplast. It's also a more rigid shape. This is much more round or blob, round shape, roundish shape. This one has a cell wall. No cell wall. Only has a cell membrane. And what am I missing? I think that's it. Oh, this is often green. No specific color here. That lack of chloroplast is why. And for both, I mean, gosh, you could have listed literally anything. Endoplasmic reticulum, both have a nucleus. They both keep us alive, help with homeostasis. They both have mitochondria. Both have the nucleolus, etc. Anything that they sort of both have. So Golgi apparatus or bodies, etc. So if you never did get around to doing this, there's just a quick overview of the activity. Going back to our notes, we also have an output. You do not need to write these directions. I am putting them here for you, but you do not need to write them. You need the label cell organelle output. And then I'm going to talk you through the explanation, and you will set your paper up the way that I have it at this bottom. So it says select at least 5 organelles, so 5 of these. Compare the function of those organelles to a real-world system or object. Draw a picture of the system and then label. Provide an explanation for each comparison. So let's say I decide a school is what I'm going to draw. So I draw a picture of a school, and I say nucleus is one of the organelles, and I'm comparing it to the principal of the school because he's in charge. So I would have the organelle and what I'm comparing it to here, along with, if there's space, an explanation. I think there will be space because you can space these out a little more since you won't have directions written down. Let's say within the school, the vacuole is the storage closets, and that's because it can store things. So you literally go through and you give me 5 organelles at least, and then what you're comparing them to within that system that you picked. You draw a picture of that system, and then you label, for example, if I have the principal's office, I would label that nucleus. And color is obviously always suggested. It's not mandatory, but it is suggested. I'm also going to post some examples of this, really good ones from previous years, so that you can see what they look like. I think that'll be very helpful. Reach out if you have questions.